Papara dönüm noktasını sunar. Etkin girişimciler, rol modeller, hızlı büyüyenler. Geleceğe yön veren girişimcilerin startup'tan scale-up'a yolculuklarıyla dönüm noktası başlıyor.
Herkese merhaba, Dönüm Noktası'nın 2. sezonuyla karşınızdayız. Dönüm Noktası podcast serisinde geleceğe yön veren girişimcileri ağırlamaya bu sezonda da devam ediyoruz. Geçtiğimiz sene girişimcilerin scale-up yolculuklarını şekillendiren önemli anlar ve kişiler üzerinde durmuştuk. Bugün ise geçtiğimiz yıldan çok farklı bir dünyada yaşıyoruz. 2020'nin beraberinde getirdiği pandeminin girişimlere, girişimcilere ve ekiplerine ciddi etkileri oldu. Bu sezonda bu konuların da üzerinde duracağız. Hi Adrian.
Hi Asla.
Very nice to have you on our podcast. So our podcast's name in Turkish is Dönüm Noktası, which basically means inflection point, which is a phrase that we love at Endeavor, and we will get back to that in a little bit. But I first wanted to say welcome on behalf of the whole team at Endeavor Turkey. We're very glad to have you. So far, we've only had entrepreneurs. This is the first time we're having somebody who's from our organization. And also, you're the first non-Turkish guest of this podcast, so it's a big honor.
Oh, so I have those two hats to wear. Well, I've been a huge fan of the podcast, although I know that's been going on for a while, and I know that you've been kind of like entrepreneurs within Endeavor because you're intrapreneurs, because this was basically the first podcast that was launched within Endeavor. So I've heard a lot about it, so I'm honored to be the first non-Turkish and the first non-entrepreneur. Let's see if I don't disappoint.
Oh, yeah. Well, you won't, I'm sure. So today, we want to talk about a little bit about you, of course, a little bit about Endeavor, and a little bit about, because you sit in such a unique place at Endeavor. Well, first, of course, having overseen the Spain operations, but now you're sort of like, I always liken this to sort of you sit on top of a world map, and you can see all at once the trends that are happening. And sometimes those trends are the same. Sometimes one country diverges. But there's some like magical moments when it's like the whole map lights up with activity, And so also we want to hear a little bit about your observations and some things that we're observing in the Turkish ecosystem, whether you're seeing this anywhere else and how other countries are dealing with it. And of course, what is this weird time that we're going through? And what does that mean for entrepreneurs, which seems to be a conversation that we have like every 18 months. So I guess, 18 months from now, we're going to be faced with something else that begs the same question, but we will ask it again. So my first question, of course, is, can you tell a little bit about yourself? And what did you do before Endeavor? And how did you end up here?
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Well, I guess to your point of every 18 months, there's an inflection point. So it's very apropos to the podcast now. Let's see. I guess my history is also one of a lot of inflection points now. So I studied political science, really wanting to focus much more on the policy side. And that was basically where I was heading. Through my university years, I did work in political campaigns in both sides of the Atlantic, and I got somewhat disenchanted about politics. So I decided I was going to go into a different side. So I decided to divert completely. That's my first inflection point, and I went into finance. So I started in a trading floor for a few years. Did that for a while. I don't know why I got into this. It was my first job out of college. And what I don't understand is why I did it for so long, because I don't feel I was that great at it. And as much as I still am very much in touch with my former bosses and I adore them, I don't know why they put up with me so long. But at a trading floor was definitely not my place. Did that for a while. Then I passed on to move to another bank and a different side, and went on to foreign trade. Went into the Ministry of Industry and Commerce in Spain. Did a master's with them. And that's what got me to the U.S. So that's back in 2003, 2004. Moved to the U.S. for the first time. Was working in the Chamber of Commerce and doing, as I said, foreign trade for roughly a year. And after that, I decided I wanted to stay in the U.S. I really liked it here. It was very different. I was brought up in Spain. That's where I'm originally from. So very different working in Madrid and where I had been born and raised to all of a sudden being in New York, where so much was happening and so much action and so much exposure to the world, basically, found a job at The Economist and was working at The Economist Group for 5 or 6 years. Absolutely loved it because that exposed me again to the world. Given my first language was Spanish, I was put in charge of Latin America, and that ended up being my role there, co-heading the Latin America group for the Latin America team for the group. And after that, went back to finance at J.P. Morgan, but in a different role, doing a lot of communications and corporate relations there. Loved that and absolutely wanted to stay there. Again, was still in touch with many of my bosses and loved every minute of it. Learned a lot on leadership, organization, and so many things in that very short period of time. Sometimes I'm a bit frustrated that I only spent 3 years at JP Morgan because I wish I would have spent more. But that's when I got the call from Endeavor. Endeavor came knocking on the door, and they were opening an office in Spain, and they asked if I was interested in running that. And it's interesting because my first answer was no. I love being in the U.S. and I love what I'm doing, and everything is good here. But it got me thinking. I mean, I had known Endeavor for a while. I got to know Endeavor when I was at The Economist. I was always very intrigued by these entrepreneurs and by the people that I was meeting along the way. So I decided, why not? I spoke about it with my wife. We discussed it at length, and we decided we would do the move back to Spain. And did that for 5 years, and now here for the last 3. But have been loving it ever since. It's been a bit over 8 years, and not a minute goes by that I don't love it. And I still feel like I'm on year 1 or 2 because there's so much learning and so much exposure and so much going on.
Yeah, we like to, when we talk about it to ourselves, it's like it's an entirely new job every year. So it's it never bores you. So. As we said, we also reinvent ourselves because our ecosystems are changing so rapidly. So can you give us sort of like, and I know you weren't here in the first days, but 25 years ago, this is year 25 of Endeavor. It's year 15 for Endeavor Turkey. 25 years ago, what was the hypothesis and sort of the wild dream? And how has it evolved since?
Yeah, for me, it's fascinating to sit where I'm sitting at this point in which we are right now in this year 25. Having known Endeavor for at least, I guess I was first exposed to Endeavor back in 2006. I was actually looking through my emails. I was exposed to Endeavor back in 2006 was my first exposure to Endeavor. And it's fascinating to see what the thesis was, back then, and how the core of it is exactly still the same. I mean, it's still we select entrepreneurs because we know they are going to be the ones generating wealth and generating jobs. But then we've actually realized that there's so much more. At the beginning, we were very much obsessed about trying to measure the impact. And the impact was always jobs that were created directly or indirectly, and the revenues that were generated just to be able to or capital that was raised to be able to give a magnitude of what the wealth was like and what the job was like. Now we've realized that there's so much more to it. Now I think that as we've matured, we've realized, wait, there's so much more. And now we analyze and we overanalyze this multiplier effect, which is so kind of unknown, and we never double click on it. But it's actually the reason, the raison d'etre of Endeavor. In the end, we do this because we still believe in the entrepreneurs. We still believe in everything that we used to say 25 years ago. But now we realize there's more. There's entrepreneurs becoming role models. There's entrepreneurs becoming investors in the next generation. Entrepreneurs becoming entrepreneurs again because they're serial entrepreneurs. And then influencing others from their own teams that become entrepreneurs to people in the ecosystem. And there's all of that, and all of a sudden you realize that out of 1 or 2 co-founders that found one company, it branches out to so many influences within the ecosystem. So I think that the thesis is exactly the same. It's very social in that sense. It's supporting entrepreneurs because we know the social value they're going to be adding to their local ecosystems. But as we've evolved, we've realized that there is more to it than just analyzing the direct impact that is so measurable of the jobs and the wealth and the capital raised. No, there's much more. And at the same time, we've also realized that these big, influencers within the ecosystems are normally the largest references in the local ecosystem. And the more we can help them, the more we're actually helping the ecosystem as a whole. No?
And that's a great segue to my next question. What do you mean by help? Why should an ambitious, in Turkey we say, whoever wants to be the next peak, the next Yemeksepeti, the next insider, we want them to think from day one that their path must cross with Endeavor. Like, it has to be like, when will we know that we've sort of like hit our peak brand value? It's when an entrepreneur who has big dreams of creating, you know, the next big company in Turkey, from day one will say, and this dream, this journey includes being an Endeavor entrepreneur. And why should they want that? What do you mean by helping these amazing entrepreneurs that, you know, one might argue that will make it with or without Endeavor?
It's interesting because they very well could make it with or without Endeavor, but I do think that Endeavor just kind of changed that mindset. If I rewind, I go back to my days as a managing director of Endeavor Spain, trying to convince some of these entrepreneurs to become part of Endeavor, and some of them wouldn't get it. They were very busy building their own companies, and you know, some of them were on their way to becoming the first unicorns in the country. And fast forward now, and you see them extremely engaged, being part of the board, being part of very active in the entrepreneurial community, definitely paying it forward to the next generation. And I think that entrepreneurs need to realize that at some point in their entrepreneurial journey, it is going to be a lonely game, no? And they want to be able to have someone that they can discuss with. And that someone could be maybe in that local market, and that someone could be in the other side of the world, no? And the beauty of Endeavor is that we bring together that community. We have experts in different fields, in fintech and in marketing side and in human resources, and we can tap into those experts for sure. And that will help them in the very short term. So we can attract them in the very short term with these immediate solutions to the problems that they're facing right now and what's keeping them up at night today. But in the future, they're going to need their peers, no? Peers that have already done it, peers that have already IPO'd, peers that have already exited, peers that have started second companies, or peers that have completely failed or had to rethink their companies going, you know, with all the zigzags that we've seen, no? And I think that the beauty of what Endeavor truly brings is that peer network. We just came out of having an entrepreneur retreat in Dubai 2 weeks ago, and it's fascinating. We had roughly 90 people representing 26 countries, so basically all over the world, with very different challenges. I mean, some of them are already unicorns, some of them are not. Some of them were selected recently as Endeavor entrepreneurs, some of them well over a decade or two, no? But at the end of the day, they were a very similar group. Even if they were from completely different countries, they could be from Turkey, Philippines, and Argentina, which is the case last 2 weeks ago, no? But the challenges were the same. And it was interesting that one of the feedback points that we got from one of our entrepreneurs was how magical it was that they were actually able to come to this retreat, not really knowing too many people, and leaving feeling that they've become best friends with so many of the people that they encountered through those days, because they were able to speak about the same problems, regardless of the industry they're in. One of them was in software, the other one is in F&B. But the challenges in the end are talent, culture, capital. Those challenges are very, very constant. No? And I feel that being able to have that peer network is that one thing that entrepreneurs tend to always go back and regret. I mean, there was a recent podcast by a very well-known entrepreneur. I mean, one of the Latin America references on entrepreneurship is Nubank, you know, the neobank that IPO'd last year. And there was a recent podcast that Brian Weckworth was also an entrepreneur, made with Velez and David Velez, and David was saying that one of the things he'd regretted was not being more exposed to people that knew what they knew at the point in which he was doing it. No, so feeling that he had all the answers and not being able to tap into entrepreneurs that had already done it, that would be more than willing to share all their insights and tell them, look, don't make these 3 mistakes because I made them, or speak with these 4 people because it changed my point of view. No, and I feel that that's what Endeavor has to bring to the table. Sometimes it's not going to be easy because entrepreneurs are not going to immediately get it because they're building, they're doing so much. Yeah. So sometimes we're going to have to kind of force feed it a bit. I don't know if we'll ever get to that moment in which an entrepreneur magically gets it and says, I know that if I want to become a successful entrepreneur, I need to be. I hope that we aspire to, but I do feel that they're so focused on what they're building, rightly so, that sometimes we kind of need to force ourselves into that conversation and make them realize, wait, look at all of this and look at these future challenges and look what you're going to be thinking, and maybe be able to make them figure out. I know that in Turkey you've done an outstanding job, and you were speaking about Peak, Yemeksepeti, Insider, I mean, so many EasyCo. There's so many great examples there, no? I mean, you have what, a portfolio of 60 entrepreneurs, 60 companies?
70
over 100
companies.
70 companies,
so
yeah.
now, of course, it's much easier when it's, you know, when you can reference the best.
Now let's listen to what Linda Rothenberg, co-founder and CEO of Endeavor, has to say about how Endeavor can help entrepreneurs.
So why should an ambitious founder want to be part of Endeavor? Well, as we know, being an entrepreneur can be a lonely journey. And I think that's even truer when you are leading a really fast-growing scale-up. We know that at every inflection point, whether it's going from 10 employees to 100 employees, or 100 employees to 1,000 employees, or for some of you, 1,000 employees to 10,000 employees, but every juncture along the way, Series A, Series B, if you're bootstrapping, whatever it is, the road gets even lonelier as you scale it higher. And to have access, as we do at Endeavor, to founders creating the fastest growing scale-ups in the world in 40 markets, but who might be a half a step or a step ahead of you. Maybe they've IPO'd or SPAC'd. Maybe they've decided to sell their companies. Maybe they've had co-founder issues. Maybe they've dealt with challenges with their investors. Whatever it may be, they've seen something, they've experienced it, and for you to be able to tap into that knowledge and learn from them is something that we hear over and over is the most valuable part of being the part of the Endeavor network. We believe in of, by, for entrepreneurs, and our entrepreneurs are willing to, in a trust-based manner, share their knowledge and pay it forward. So that's the first. And the second thing is, we've seen the good times and when, everyone wants to come invest and everyone wants to be your friend, and we've seen really tough times. And at Endeavor, we take seriously our job of being entrepreneur first. And that means we're there to celebrate and support and cheer you on during those good times. We're also there for when the going gets tougher. And so I think that being part of a network that has your back, being with like-minded founders who are building, as I said, the most meaningful scale-ups on the planet, but are willing to be part of this circle of trust and share their experiences founder to founder, I think is something that you won't find elsewhere. So hope to see many of you, and cheering on the founders in the Istanbul and Turkish tech ecosystem. We've seen extraordinary innovations coming out of the last decade, and I know the next decade we'll see even more.
So sitting where you sit right now, what's keeping these entrepreneurs up at night these days? What do they come to you with? Because I know when they come to you, it's the biggest of the challenges. Like if it's, help Adrian, help Linda, or, connect me to this person or that person. What's sort of in your inbox these days?
It's interesting because you did mention the whole thing of trends, no? And it is true that we sit at a very unique vantage point in which we can actually see everything from a global perspective, no? And the one thing that is keeping, let's see, it's always keeping entrepreneurs up at night is talent, no? And that's a constant. But now more than any other time, we are seeing that. No, there's this huge, on the one side, there's the great resignation, but on the other side, there's also these whole talent wars, this whole idea of Zoom working and being able to work remotely has created also an opportunity, especially for certain types of employees.
So
no?
We should add, unless maybe some of our listeners don't realize this, but Endeavor is mainly in what we call emerging markets. So all markets that are targets for this remote work scenarios where American or big European companies are trying to come and steal talent from. So we are the givers, all of us, and so please continue.
We are the givers, and it's interesting because the 40 markets in which we're present are the ones that are the biggest eye on talent is there. Turkey being one of them, but we also have Argentina, we have Chile, we have the Philippines. There's so much talent right now, and it's become so global that now all of a sudden there are all these all these talent wars. No, so I'm guessing one of the questions right now that is coming up most is how do they maintain the culture in this remote era, and how do they attract and retain that talent? No? And as I said, it's always been something that's been top of mind, but I see that that's been now more than ever. The one thing that was a huge question was always dealing with investors and how that relationship with the investors, evolved through time. That's something that we've seen less questions about or around lately, but I don't know if it has to do more with the market moment right now or it has to do with a trend. I do see that the question is coming up most right now, more than anything around managing investors or attracting new investors, has a lot to do with talent and culture now.
And so another thing we're seeing, which I didn't expect. So at the beginning of the pandemic, remember our first messages to the entrepreneurs, or the messages that we helped relay from global VCs to entrepreneurs, were very much capital is going to dry up. If you don't have 18 months of money in this bank, you're basically screwed. So see you in 2 years, and it didn't happen that way. There was actually a lot of capital. Some of our biggest exits happened during the pandemic. And that was a very welcome surprise. And we realized, that deals can be done over Zoom, and unexpected investors were looking at our countries because now they don't have to get on a plane and travel, etc. But something else happened, which, of course, for most of these companies, the end result, the exit, is it's an acquisition or an IPO. And the IPO market is not doing too well these days. It's really tanking. And especially the tech IPOs that happened, in the past 2-3 years, they've all lost value. How do you think that's going to affect valuations for, our companies that are raising, very many Endeavor entrepreneurs are raising Series C's, D's, E's, getting closer and closer to the IPO. Do you think in the short term, valuations are going to be impacted? And is this something that entrepreneurs are talking about right now?
It is something that they're talking about. They're definitely going to be impacted. It's you've seen that trend, especially in the last 2 years, But at the same time, this whole idea of what you were mentioning, this Zoom investing and being able to do this has put the focus on ideas and entrepreneurs being really global. Before, we used to see these hubs. It was, the main hubs were San Francisco, London, etc. Whereas all of a sudden now we see that entrepreneurs are truly global. I mean, the explosion of unicorns in these unlikely markets has been exponential. I mean, we've been talking about for the last almost year, for the last 7 months, we've been talking about dLocal, a company in Uruguay that became their first unicorn. No, I mean, a tech unicorn out of Uruguay. It's quite fascinating. And we've seen so many of these unlikely protagonists, out of these markets that investors and people were just not looking at in the past. So I do think that all this fluctuation right now is going to go towards seeing more of what's going on in markets that traditionally weren't even looked at. I mean, my excitement has to do with that. My excitement has to do with investors now being very excited about Turkey, about Philippines, Vietnam, Egypt. There's Nigeria. I mean, so many markets that we've been present in for a decade or two that we've been saying, these are amazing entrepreneurs. They have really global ideas and global aspirations. And people are like, yeah, that's, you kind of, that, you have no option but to say that. I'm like, no, I'm saying that because I'm seeing that, And all of a sudden it's like everyone is flocking to our markets to say, oh, wow, you were right. There is amazing fintech companies, or there are amazing fintech companies coming out of Latin America, and software companies coming out of the Middle East, and et cetera. So I think that it's a clear opportunity for us. And given the 40 markets in which we're present, as you mentioned, it's mainly emerging markets and economies and crisis. It's the economies that people were not much systematically looking into traditionally in the past. And all of a sudden now there are these exciting markets. I mean, we've seen it with Mexico in 2020, 2021. We're starting to see it now in Egypt as well. And with Turkey, it's already been the case. There's all these kind of what we're calling here these unlikely protagonists that are just, it's fascinating because it's the new trend.
I mean, when I visited Brazil, and I think it was 2013, Brazil wasn't doing too well at the time, and but it had gone through the boom, and it was going through a slowing period, and we went to a lot of these presentations, and basically they all showed us, the famous time cover of the Jesus statue going up like a rocket, and then side by side.
It was The Economist. It was The Economist. I used to. I was working there at the time, so I remember it was The Economist.
Okay. So, and then. But I guess a couple years later, the same cover, but now the Jesus statue is like going downhill and hitting that. And I remember, and this was the time when Turkey was actually on the way up. And I remember when I came back, I was like, oh God, I hope I never talk about our ecosystem in that way. And of course, fast forward 8-10 years, now we are kind of in a, economy-wise and ecosystem-wise, sometimes, not as excited or happening as we were back then. And so talk to me a little bit about these cycles, like what happened in Brazil, because Brazil is one of our oldest offices, so we've seen it go through so many cycles. We've been in Mexico from day one. What can we expect in our side of the world when things turn down a little bit? Like what happens in ecosystems in terms of cycles?
So it's fascinating. As I said, I used to work at The Economist back then, and I was covering Latin America. So it was fascinating when that cover took place. The president of Brazil was Lula, President Lula, and President Lula had a phrase that he coined that was Brazil is the land of eternal promise. No, it was like always going to happen, but never quite happened. No, and it's kind of the case. I mean, it happens, and then but it has a fascinating internal market. I think that we've seen. Just analyzing, I'm going to analyze Brazil first, and then I can analyze other markets. But if you look at Brazil exclusively, you had the first generation of entrepreneurs. Many of them were local entrepreneurs that had been trained and formed and had prior experiences in international organizations. Actually, let me do an Endeavor pitch right here. The first Brazilian unicorn was 99 Taxi, which was a company that was acquired by Didi, which was a mobility company, and the co-founder of that company was a former managing director of Endeavor Brazil. No? So it was the former you and me, but in Brazil. So it's that meant that this person was actually exposed to international markets. No, and that was the first generation. I think the second generation has been a lot of these expats that moved to Brazil because they saw an opportunity to be able to adapt something that they'd seen. And you could see there the cases of Florian from Loft, you have Sergio from Creditas, you have David, we mentioned, from Nubank. You have so many of these entrepreneurs, Ben from Via So, I mean, there's so many of these entrepreneurs that were foreign to Brian Reckworth, who I mentioned, from Vivarel. So there were expats that went into the local market because they saw the potential of the market, the size of the market, and the opportunity right there. And now we're seeing a next generation of entrepreneurs that are locally developed. So they're locals, they're Brazilians, that are now going into this, with all the leveraging all the knowledge of their peers, but also leveraging the fact that it's become such an attractive market, and also a market that has a lot of attraction also from a capital perspective. And also international funders are actually looking at that market. But we see a lot of local entrepreneurs now. It's now Brazilians that are actually setting up the next Brazilian unicorn. Now it's not the foreigners anymore. What is fascinating, if I get myself out of Brazil and I look at markets like Turkey, for me, when I look at Turkey, I tend to look at two markets that fascinate me within Endeavor out of the foreign markets that we have. I mean, I'm fascinated by all, and they're all in different stages. But one that is always fascinating is Turkey and Argentina. And I know that there are not that many similarities, but if you allow me for a second, I'll tell you, I feel there's a ton of similarities. One, there's always that economic, political uncertainty, which also leads to fluctuation. But the quality of entrepreneurship is just outstanding. I mean, we were talking about Insider, Yemeksepeti, and Peak. I mean, and EasyCo. I mean, four very different companies, and we're talking about fintech, we're talking about delivery, we're talking about gaming, we're talking about media. I mean, it's fascinating to see that so diverse sectors represented. No, in an economy that is not characterized by being constant. No, but entrepreneurs are very resilient, very global from day one. No, and we see the same in Argentina. I mean, Mercado Libre, Globant, Voila, Cook Unity. So many of these unicorns are future unicorns in the country, and I'm fascinated always because I see the divergence. I mean, not divergence, but the diversity actually in sectors represented. No? Because many times, if you look at markets, they have two or three sectors that are the core representation. No? So maybe if it's a fintech market or if it's a SaaS market, you see a lot in that kind of sector. Yeah. But all of a sudden, you see markets like, in my case, when I'm looking at Argentina and Turkey, I'm always fascinated. I'm always looking, what is the next company that Aza's going to bring? What sector is going to surprise us out of Turkey? And I can never get it right because it's fascinating. And Argentina is the same thing. Those are two markets. I'm not saying that I'm not fascinated by all the rest of the markets in which we're operating, but the ones that always bring these kind of like complete different sectors are those two, no? So I guess it has a lot to do with that resilience and that fact that that instability makes for very resilient and global entrepreneurs, no?
This is true. And so I guess one of the things that must hit your inbox a lot is expansion into the US. And so in Turkey, so the one of the things that I think sets us apart from like in Argentina. Argentina's backyard is Latin America. They speak the same language, soft landing into Spain, to Europe, like the path is almost there. Or, if you're in Egypt, you have both the Arabic-speaking countries, plus you have Africa. In Turkey, no one really, other than us, speaks Turkish. And we're surrounded by, a lot of different neighbors, a lot of conflicts with neighbors as well, and lots of different languages, etc. So global expansion has been the theme for us. One, because you have to diversify from this country risks, so it doesn't make sense for many entrepreneurs to only make money in Turkish liras when the currency is doing so badly, and of course diversification for other things as well. And a lot of this generation of entrepreneurs, the story is going to be one of successful international expansion. So now for gaming companies, obviously this is super easy. It has no language. From day one, you're global. But for consumer B2B enterprise SaaS, there's a whole different strategies and models you can take. And of course, the US is the holy grail, right? Especially if you're in software. That's where everybody wants to be, yet it's super expensive. You don't know where to start. What are you seeing in that? What's the right time for a company, do you think, to come to the US? What models are people employing? And what can Endeavor do to help them, etc.?
It's interesting. Yes, it does hit my inbox a lot, and you're right that language is one of those first barriers. No, but the reality is that most of the markets in which we operate, except the Spanish-speaking ones that have that common language, most of them have their own language, and they have to deal with the same barrier. No? So if you look at the Bulgarian, Romanian, Philippine companies, Nigeria, and most of these countries, they have their own language too. So they also have to deal with the same issues. Which is not limiting. I think that it just makes you realize that you need to be an international firm from day one, which is interesting because sometimes I look at these Brazilian companies and they're only looking at Brazil. It's a ginormous market, so they can look at Brazil for quite some time before they actually need to go out, get out. No, we're seeing more of by the way, we're seeing more and more of that in the last 4 or 5 years. No,
really
getting out. Brazilian companies getting out, especially. Yeah,
they've already getting out.
Yeah, they've already realized that. They've satisfied their local market, but they also have something to offer international markets. So they're landing in other parts mainly the other parts of Latin America. No, but as far as what you were asking of the question of what I get mostly is it is that normally the companies that are expanding into the US, they've already proven their model for sure in their country, if not also in their region. No, so most of the times they've already expanded regionally, and they already have a proof of concept that there is something there. There is an added value of what we can do. The common mistake that I tend to see is one, which is not a mistake, which is the founder trying to move to the US, which is good, or founder or co-founder, that's a good thing. So I'd say that's not a mistake. But the mistake that I do see is trying to bring someone from your local hero, your regional hero, trying to export them and bring them into the US and try to do a plug and play model in which, well, they already know the company, they already know the culture. Let them now sell into this new market, which has nothing to do with the market that they're penetrating. No? And I always try to tell everyone, treat the U.S. as if it were a small village in which everyone knows each other, although it's not the case. But there are similarities, and you do have to try to hire at least some of that local talent, especially on the business development side. I'm thinking much more, obviously, all the operational part is going to, and that is going to be based out of the local country. But mainly when you're trying to expand, you're trying to introduce yourself into new clients, no? And trying to get new clients, does tend to imply you need to get someone that actually understands those clients, understands that needs, kind of speaks the same language. And I'm not speaking about English, I'm speaking about the same corporate language, knowing what the times are. I mean, there are a lot of cultural differences between doing business in different parts of the world. And the US is just like any other one, no? And with its pros and its cons, no? So I do tend to tell everyone, try to find if you can actually, try to see if you can actually find local talent that will, that will be able to do that local penetration, because it's a huge market, but it's one market. I mean, that's the fascinating part of it. It's the 50 states, but and a huge opportunity. But you gotta be able to hit it right, no? Yeah. So I'm always trying to bet on entrepreneurs that are coming here, surrounding themselves with amazing local talent that can actually allow them to scale, no?
And the US also is changing, right? Because it used to be that, for a software company, you had to be in the Bay Area. For if you're going to do fintech, maybe you have to be Miami. Where is that coming from? I mean, when did we open our office in Miami? 2012.
That was 10 years ago. Yeah, 2012.
2012. It was our first America
US
office in the US, and there was lots of discussion about America, that's not an emerging market, don't put our resources there, or on the other side, yes, that's a great move, but look at what's happening with Miami now. It's attracting a lot of companies, and the same with Austin, the same with some other cities. So the US path is also, it can take many shapes and forms right now, it seems, and so it's not like, oh well, you move to the Bay Area and that's that.
Yeah, you definitely need to figure out where you want to penetrate, and you want to be able to validate your concept with that first client or clients, no? Just to be able to say, this does work here, no? So I already have a bunch of international clients. What we have seen a lot is people that are leveraging their existing client network to actually be able to, so they're already working with the affiliate of company A, that is a US company, and then they're just trying to go upstream and figure out how they can actually work with the headquarter or the head office. No, we've seen a lot of that, but a lot of times it's about being able to prove that your model can work. And some companies we've even seen, they've actually even gone to the point of trying to brand themselves as a US company, so that people realize that they're operating as a US company. I'm not saying necessarily that's the case. That should be the case, but we have seen it. Whatever works, but in the end, you do need that validation from a local perspective in order to be able to expand. But it does go back to talent. I mean, having that right local talent that you could leverage to be able to introduce yourself into those.
What are some? Do you have any examples of Endeavor companies that are successful in the States?
I mean, look, it's. The one that comes to mind when I'm thinking is when I was working in Spain, it was Alien Vault, which was a company that was then acquired by AT&T. It was actually the largest tech acquisition for a Spanish company, but it was fascinating because their model. So there was a cybersecurity firm, and what they did was they offered. What they were offering was a corporate offering. It was a corporate sale, and in Spain, doing a corporate sale at that level required a lot of in-person meetings because they were selling a product that's a subscription that was the price point was roughly $6,000 to $7,000. No, so $6,000 to $7,000 in Spain required a couple of in-person meetings,
wining and dining and in-person meetings.
Whereas in the U.S., they came here and all of a sudden they realized that these sales could be done with a phone call. I mean, they could have a huge team of telemarketers. So they got here, they realized that they didn't need to meet in person with their clients. They just needed to have a very well-trained sales force, but it could be based out of city A. And that was really it. And that's what they did. That's how they went about it. And all of a sudden it was much more of a different conversion rate and different game. No, all of a sudden you were able to close these relatively larger deals, and some of them were significantly larger, but you could do it over the phone in one or two calls. No, so it did change hugely, and obviously that led them to reconfigure their whole business and bring the whole model to the U.S. and just re-domicile in the U.S. That was just because at one point 70-60% of their revenues were coming from the U.S. No,
yeah, which led to their acquisition, of course.
Which led to their acquisition, yeah, by a U.S. company.
What we are trying to do and what we can do together even more is to collect these stories of successful global expansion, especially in the US, because when I talk to people about Endeavor, like, you're going to hear a couple of words over and over. One is inflection point, one is role model effect, one is blah, blah. And the role model effect, like that, this is also a role model effect, like the successful US expansion role models who can then talk to entrepreneurs who are in this process, because it's very costly. So most companies don't have the luxury to try and fail. And there's so many, like, I think one of the things that comes very easily to people is to do this through partners. Because, it's like you can sit where you sit and you find partners and they sell your stuff for you. But rarely, I think very often it doesn't work, because investors aren't crazy about the model, and that partner.
Well, those investors also are a huge part of the help. I mean, they can help out with those initial connections.
Yeah.
I told you about an example that came to mind, which was the first one that came to mind, because I just remember how mind-changing it was for them, the model, what they were selling in Spain versus the U.S. But we have several successful entrepreneurs that have expanded to the U.S. I mean, I keep on thinking of companies like, Descomplica, Insider in Turkey, Blue Ground from Greece. I mean, there's several that have actually been able to land successfly in the U.S. Most of them have actually implied their founders moving to the U.S. and then obviously surrounding themselves also with a local team.
And Insider left U.S. almost to the last, if you think about it. Like, they conquered many, many different parts of the world. And just like you said, like, by the time they hit U.S., they had this big list of international successes and clients and proven models behind them. And of course, a lot of money in their war chest, lots of money in the bank for their US expansion, and they just raised another round. So it seems like that's, and more it's of course salaries are going up, right? Like, what we're seeing here, you're also seeing there. When was the last time America went through inflation, or Europe? Like, this is all things that they have to get used to, but wages are going up. Talent is hard to come by. So it takes a lot of preparation to expand into the US in this condition.
Well, that's the good thing of coming from a market with so many ups and downs. Is that, for example, you're used to these things. I mean, here people are kind of thinking, oh my God, it's inflation. What do we do? And in other markets, like, yeah, inflation, we know what to do. I mean, so it's kind of like when the pandemic started and markets all of a sudden shut down, and people were like bracing themselves. We had so many entrepreneurs that have been working in countries that have shut down so many times, and they were just giving us courses on resilience. It was like, well, look, this is what you do, this is what you focus on, this is what, and it was fascinating. I mean, it wasn't a pandemic, but it was other things that have actually forced those markets to shut down. So they were used to it. Resilience is definitely there now.
And it's also, what's going on to the north of us here is very sad. But talk a little bit about this WhatsApp group that you and I are both in, that's entrepreneurs from all over the world trying to help their entrepreneurs in Ukraine and Russia. Like, those two countries are at war, but we have entrepreneurs that have employees in both countries, and how that community comes together.
Yeah, so it was fascinating when the war broke out. It was a Wednesday, and Thursday we were already getting a lot of different requests, and we were trying to centralize it. We just didn't know how. So the most agile thing to do was just put together a WhatsApp group, and we put together a WhatsApp group in which we had the founder or co-founder of one of the companies with the person that they designated as their point person, with the managing director of each country in which that entrepreneur is from, and it really became a best practice sharing. At the beginning, it was what was going on, how to get people out of the country. Then at one point it was how do we transfer money into the country? How do we? So there's been different things going on, and it's been amazing to see how so much support was pouring. I mean, I have to take my hat off with both our Endeavor Romania and our Endeavor Bulgaria board, but also Endeavor Poland, which we haven't even launched, and they've been so incredibly supportive. I mean, our board members, which will be announced soon, have been just also they've been going really above and beyond. I mean, it's been amazing, but it's been really good to have that support group because as much as we don't have operations in Russia nor Ukraine, we do have entrepreneurs that have teams there. Some of them have significant teams and significant presence. Some of them had a couple of developers, a couple of teams. So it went from, we had entrepreneurs that had several hundreds of employees in Ukraine to having entrepreneurs that had a couple of employees, but they were all going through the exact same process. I mean, you and I who've been in the group, we've been able to learn a lot. I mean, it was from the early days of just being able to cross the border and who could cross and who couldn't, and being able to define that to then the complete shutdown in which only females and children can actually go through the border and over people over 60 could go through the border, but males in that range could not, to being able to know which borders were the ones that were safe to cross, now to being able to bring money into the country. So
and it's almost like our friends in Bulgaria and Romania were saying, I will meet them at the border almost, like it was.
Well, that's what I was saying. I mean,
of a support system.
We have one of our board members of Endeavor in Poland who has actually acquired buses to be able to get buses to the border to be able to bring refugees back into Warsaw, no? So or distribute them around Poland, no? So that to the extent that it's not only they go above and beyond. I mean, like buying any bus that they could find to be able to just get them to the frontier and be able to the border and be able to get them back into the country. No, people have really been going above and beyond, and then the community itself has been very supportive. I mean, they've been able to give themselves tips of what systems to use, what services to use, how they can get money from point A to point B, all of that. Which border crossings were safe, which parts of the country are safer than others. No, so it's been good within all the sadness of the situation which it is. And let's see how long it lasts. We can't forget that it's a war between two countries. We're talking about the Ukrainian refugees, but the same thing can be said with Russians. We had a lot of teams with people in Russia and local teams wanting to leave the country too. So it's also been and also local teams that wanted to leave the country or wanted to get paid and they couldn't get paid. So it's a humanitarian crisis in many levels because the repercussion is going to be much broader than Ukraine. But we want to be entrepreneur first, as we always are, supporting our entrepreneurs so they could support their teams. And I felt really good about that group of, I don't know, I'd say 10 to 15 entrepreneurs that have supported each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think they're going to keep having these conversations. So my last question, Adrian, is we also expect something from these entrepreneurs, right? Like we give a lot of support and there's, a community, but there's also an expectation that they have a role to play in their ecosystem. What is that, in your view?
So, in my view, part of the role of Endeavor is not only being able to support and to connect and all of that. It's also being able to make the entrepreneur realize at his own pace, in his own terms, that they're more than just their company. That they are that role model in the ecosystem, and they have a responsibility as that role model. No, and it's not only about saying that they pay it forward, but it's about being able to do it. No? It's being able to speak in conferences to influence the future generations, is to be able to invest in the next generations. Most of these things happen naturally, but sometimes it's about us being able to map it. Also, you're an angel investor. Yeah, that's already influence. Also, you have a couple of your former employees that went and launched a company that's now doing an amazing job. That is also part of your multiplier effect. And it's also by educating them that they are more than just a company, because in their day-to-day, they're closed in their offices trying to deal with all the problems of hypergrowth. With I have to raise a round. I have to figure out what to do with my core talent. I have to figure out what to do to retain it, and at the same time, I'm expanding into a new market, and all of those, and my investments in technology, and all of that is their day to day. But we have to kind of allow them to come out of their day to day to realize that they've become a force in the local ecosystem, and some of these entrepreneurs one day, raise a mammoth round, become a unicorn, and all of a sudden everyone's looking at them. Wait, where did this company come from? No, most of the times we've seen that company, we knew it, we were not surprised. But in the local ecosystem, everyone is like, where did this happen? And part of our role is making them realize that they're more than just themselves. And try to, get them into this mentality of paying it forward, especially in countries in which maybe that mentality is not as present. No,
yeah.
I mean, there are markets in which that is just ingrained in the culture and in the education system. But in countries in which it's not, we need to be able to tell entrepreneurs, okay, you've done it, you've made it, you're successful. Now you need to inspire the next generation. Now you need to be this. This is what the local ecosystem expects from you. Now,
and I think that a lot of the smaller Endeavor countries with big diaspora populations have also sort of taken this task of being the bridge between their diaspora founders and their local country, right? So we see this in like Lebanon and Greece and Bulgaria and some of the smaller countries where a lot of founders, I mean, there's a lot of people of that country's descent who've now gone to create companies like elsewhere in the world, in another Endeavor market maybe, and they become Endeavor entrepreneurs because they want to have closer ties to their community, and sometimes this leads them to like hire people in that country even if they hadn't before, create like R&D centers and this and that. So I think that's also very valuable because we are now going through that. Like Turkey, for a long time, we didn't lose a lot of talent. You know, we were like a quite closed community, and but in the past like 4 or 5 years, we're seeing a lot of people, well, first that leave the country altogether, and then, you know, they may or may not end up founding businesses. Sometimes they join successful startups. This is like even before they start these companies. So it's it's one of the things that keeps me up at night, but also like when I force myself to see the glasses half full situation, like I think like having a successful diaspora is such a big asset for us locally. And I get to the point where I'm like, well, now every single entrepreneur who wants to expand to like Germany or America or, you know, England knows at least one person there from like their university days or something. Like they can call up and say, hey, like, what is it like doing business there, right? Like these global connections, this is how they happen. So this is how I make myself less worried about the brain drain that the problem that we're having. But I think one of the things, the big roles that Endeavor plays is through this international community, creating bonds of diaspora founders to their local countries.
And those diaspora founders sometimes are also already the role models of the local country. So the local media has picked up on them, and they've been references. I mean, I can't help thinking of Enrique from Brex, which is a Brazilian entrepreneur that founded this fintech company, financial services company, actually, in the U.S. And their core market was always the U.S., but he was always regarded as a Brazilian entrepreneur. You know, so now it's an Endeavor entrepreneur, by the way. Also now a decacorn as well. So we're using these sophisticated terms, but at the same time, a local reference in Brazil. Now he does have presence in Brazil and is expanding into Brazil and has a team in Brazil. But back then he was being highlighted as a Brazilian entrepreneur, as that role model for Brazilians, and he had no presence in Brazil. He was originally Brazilian, but we have many of those founders that are coming from these local markets. They might have been trained in that local market, but their business is not present in the local market. But they do want to be somewhat linked. We can help bridge that so that we can actually create that link, or we can actually, just act as a speaker or a megaphone for that influence to be bigger now.
Excellent. So my last question, what's the best part of your job?
Oh my God, so many things. I mean, really, the job is amazing. I mean, for a person like me, if you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, I consider myself a connector. So I love being able to meet people and then being able to connect them. So my favorite part is just being able to connect founders with founders and people with people, and just meeting new people and always learning and being exposed. I came back from this Dubai event so full of energy, just being able to be surrounded by 9 entrepreneurs. I had a list of 50 people I wanted to speak with, and I only spoke with 20 of them. I'm frustrated. I'm still kicking myself for having missed the other whatever. But it was just so energetic. I think that it's a very unique job. I think I'm always telling people that join Endeavor, when they join in, this is their first job or they join as an intern. I always tell them, and I mean it with my heart. I'm jealous. I'm that you were able to get this job as your first job. You know?
Yeah.
Because it took me a few years. I'm now in my mid-40s, and it took me a few years to find it. No, but it's amazing. It's so inspirational and it's so rewarding at the same time. Now, there's really so much to love. Every day there's an insightful conversation. It could be with someone that is much older and much knowledgeable, and it could be someone that is much younger and still much knowledgeable. But it's always extremely inspiring. And I think that that inspiration and that learning and that ability to be able to connect those people later, I kind of love it. I get my energy from that. No?
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you so much. Hopefully, I'll see you somewhere in the world soon.
Perfect.
Probably
Yes.
Greece. And looking forward to it. Thank you on behalf of my whole team. And we're gonna, obviously all listen to this and hopefully the Turkish ecosystem and also our friends at Endeavor. But your insights are always so valuable. And I am also, I've been here for a long time and I'm still very excited about where we're going and what our ecosystems are turning into, and our entrepreneurs and their second companies. We'll see them through their third companies, and it's amazing how with every new company they are energized, they energize us, and it's why the job never gets boring. But thank you so much. Good morning to New York, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Asla, thank you so much, and thanks to your amazing team who always is doing. They're always impressing me with something new. I was able to spend some time with your teammate in Dubai as well, and I'm eager to, one, visit Turkey, so find an excuse to go to Turkey, or two, engage and meet up with you and the rest of the team at some event, hopefully Greece, and if not, something sooner, hopefully rather than later in the year.
Awesome. Thank
you.
Podcast'imizi bitirmeden önce ikinci sezon ana sponsorumuz Papara hakkında kısa bir bilgi vermek istiyorum. Papara, 2020 senesinde Endeavor girişimi seçilen bir fintech şirketi. Papara ile hem web hem uygulama üzerinden 7/24 ücretsiz para transferi yapabiliyor, faturalarınızı ödeyebiliyor ve bütçenizi yönetebiliyorsunuz. Ayrıca Papara kartınızı tüm dünyada kullanıp borçlanmadan harcama yapabiliyor ve cashback özelliği ile anında nakit kazanabiliyorsunuz. Papara ile ilgili daha fazla bilgiye www.papara.com'dan ulaşabilirsiniz. Dönüm noktasını destekledikleri için Papara'ya teşekkür ediyoruz.
Papara dönüm noktasını sundu.